Hey Central Baptist, welcome to church this morning. It's so great that you can be with us, and we hope that you are well and that you're staying safe. Just a couple of notices that we'd like to highlight before we begin our service this morning. First of all, we just want to celebrate a little bit. The AGM was held on Wednesday night, and just to let you know that Lizzie Moore was unanimously appointed in the Grow role, which we're very excited about, and will start in February next year. All three of our elders were re-elected. That's Nathan, Leanne and Nick, both all unanimously, as well as a passed budget. So we're very excited, very productive Wednesday night that was, and we're pretty pumped and really excited for next year. Just one other thing is we want to say, just a reminder about the Gummy Awards. This is the last weekend for nominations to the Gummy Awards. We have 5 values in church, and we're looking for people that are embodying those values through life and ministry here at church. So if you would like to nominate somebody for that, please look for an online nomination form, or if you could submit a written form, which will be at the welcome desk at church on Sunday morning. But this is the last day for that. Just a reminder, nominate a person once for a category, please, rather than the same person for all 5. And then last but not least, the Celebrate service is coming up on the 12th of December. We're pretty excited about that. We're hoping that you will come and celebrate what has been a really interesting year for church and family. So that's something to look forward to. I would also just like to extend a personal thank you to the families that supported our tea for James Hoggers Junior Campus teachers. We had such a great turnout for that, and I just want to say a very big thank you for those families that contributed little baked goods and those things. It was incredibly enjoyed by all the teachers, and they sent a big thank you from the teaching staff at Junior Campus. Other than that, thank you so much. Have a lovely day, and we hope that you stay blessed. Kia ora.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Ros Harrington, and Keith asked me to share with you a little bit about my work at Hospice Southland. So I work there as the Allied Health Team Leader. So part of my role is managing a team, and the other part is providing social work and counselling support to patients and families of hospice. So in my team, I have social workers and counsellors. I've got a spiritual coordinator, a day program and living legacy coordinator, and also have a social worker counsellor in Queenstown. So that takes up a little bit of my time. The other big part of my role that I love doing is supporting patients and families when they've had a diagnosis of a terminal illness, and that's supporting them on that pathway of grief, anticipatory grief, as they anticipate all the losses that are ahead of them. I also support patients and families when they come into the inpatient unit. We have a 6-bed inpatient ward, and people come in for end-of-life care, but not just that. We also have patients come in for what we call respite, and that's 7 days planned respite, just to give caregivers a break from caring for their loved one. And we also bring people in for what we call symptom management, and that might be around sorting out pain or medications and just getting them back on track again and sending them home. So a big part of my role there is working with the families to get as much support in place as we can so that they can care for their loved one at home. You know, at hospice, we want to totally support patients' wishes for their end-of-life care. We pull out all stops to make that happen. So if somebody wants to die at home, we endeavour to support families to make that happen. Sometimes that's just not possible because it gets too hard, but we try and support patients to live life to the max, even though they have a terminal diagnosis. Yeah. So the other question is, what do I enjoy most about my work at hospice, and what are some of the biggest challenges? I'd have to say, one of the things I enjoy the most is spending time with patients in their last days of life. Just the level of deep sharing that happens during that time. People talk about things that they've never talked to anybody else before because they want to get it off their chest. And you're really treading on sacred ground during those conversations. It's a really special and privileged time. Also, to be involved with families' lives at such a vulnerable time, it's such a hard road, walking when you've got a loved one who's dying, and just to be able to support them in some small way is really rewarding. Some of the challenges, though, a big challenge is people management and, leading a team and dealing with different personalities and likes and dislikes. I do find that challenging. And I suppose the other thing is, working in an environment daily where there is death and loss has an impact on you emotionally. And, I often come home from work feeling really tired. And I think this emotional tiredness, they talk about vicarious trauma, and that's the trauma we experience from listening and seeing stories of others that are going through traumatic and hard times. And, I've had to learn that it's okay to get sad. I still go back to my office and have a bit of a cry. We as colleagues talk together, and I have supervision where I can offload stuff, but that's the flip side to, I suppose, working in such an environment. The other question is, what are some reflections around grief and loss that I've learnt since working at hospice? And look, I've learnt heaps. I suppose one of the first things is that everybody's experience of grief is different, and there are no formulas, there's no pathway, there are no stages that people go through. It's as individual as your fingerprint, and not to put people in boxes and expect them to do or be a certain way. I think the other thing too is to be able to sit with strong emotions and just hold that, not be scared of that. I think as Kiwis, Kiwis find it hard to deal with strong emotions. That's been my experience. I don't know whether being an Aussie makes a difference, but that's one thing that I've learnt. Is to be able to sit with that, to honour people's feelings and their expression of grief. Sometimes no words are needed. It's just being there, allowing them, the honour of experience the loss of someone dear to them. So that's one thing. I think the other thing too is just an understanding of we don't get over grief. Grief remains part of our life till the end. Our lives grow around that grief, but life is always different. It will never be the same, and it's helping people understand that, and it's carving a new pathway and a new life, but there's no time frame on that. So that would probably have to be, the other thing that I've learnt. Lots of other things too, just around just being there for people. Sometimes it's really hard to know what to say, but don't give up on people. Just hang in there with them. Grief's a long journey. Yeah. So the last question was, how does my faith intersect with my work at hospice? And look, I suppose I'm one of the lucky ones because we talk about spirituality all the time at hospice. It's just part of what we do because we care about the whole person. So we don't just look at someone's physical needs or their emotional or mental needs. We're also looking at their spiritual needs because that becomes really important to people in their last days of life, even if it hasn't before. And so there are lots of opportunities to talk about that with people. And, I will often ask people about what their beliefs are on what they believe will happen after they die. I remember talking to a man not long ago. I asked him that same question, and we talked for quite a while, and then he said to me, Ros, what do you believe? And I am really careful what I say because I'm not there to convert people to become Christians. That's certainly not what my role is. But, I share with people what my beliefs are and what my journey's been. And look, I just shared with him about a time quite a while ago now when I was living in Taupo and going through a really tough time and had stopped going to church. And I'd go down to Lake Taupo on a Sunday morning and spend time with God, just talking to him. And one morning I called out to God and I said, God, show me that you're there and that you care about me. And I felt this warmth on my back and this voice say to me, Ros, I love you and I care about you. And from that moment on, I had this incredible level of peace. And, I was able to share that with him and he really thanked me for that. And that, I suppose that's just something that I left with him. But, there's been other opportunities to pray with people if that's what they ask me to do. But, a big part of my role is to support people's own faiths and spirituality and getting people into hospice to meet with them, if that's the imam or, somebody from the Catholic Church, whatever. We're there really to support people's individual needs. So, I've learned a lot, about compassion and love for people, by watching the nurses and how they care for people in their last days of life. I don't think it's hard to be a Christian working at hospice because it's just such an opportunity space to work out your values of compassion and care and love for others. So I think we're all there, for our own reasons, but I count it as a privilege to be working there. Thank you.
Take a few minutes to reflect on what losses you've experienced this year. Maybe it's opportunities lost. Maybe due to COVID. Maybe it's a loved one who's died or left. Maybe the losses could be health related, around what you can do and not do. Maybe the losses around employment. Could be a dream, a long-held dream that's been lost. Could be a close relationship. I was reading a book this week on grief in preparation for this message, and it struck me again the complexity of grief. That everyone's journey is different. So often we're quick to judge and say, oh, well, here's where you are in the grief cycle, that's where you are. Or, it's only a cat, that's not so bad. When I lost my dad, this is what happened to me. We're very quick to judge and give our views, but there is no right way to grieve. There might be some things that are helpful or less helpful. But what's been helpful to one person is often not helpful to another. I don't think any one person can fully understand what we're going through. We often think, oh, well, because I lost my child or went through a marriage breakup, I understand, but our journey will be different. And then if we're the one grieving, we can sometimes beat ourselves up by comparing ourselves to others and think, well, that seemed to come through okay, so why haven't I? Why hasn't that worked for me? A couple of things that struck me. Everyone's journey is different, but the other thing that struck me is that there are no answers. The psalm we read before asks lots of questions. Has the Lord rejected me forever? Will he never again be kind to me? Is his unfailing love gone forever? Have his promises permanently failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he slammed the door on his compassion? And of course, the key question we ask in grief and suffering is, well, why? Why is this happening? Job lost his family and his livelihood and his health, and he asked why. His friends tried to give him answers, and half the book of Job is his friends trying to give answers to the questions. The question of why. And Job calls them miserable. You're a miserable lot of counselors. The fact is, we don't know the answers to why. And trying to suggest we do is just hurtful and arrogant. We're very good at our platitudes as Christians. Oh, this will make you stronger. Don't you appreciate how much you have in God? Oh, it's all in God's plan. You just need to move on in God. You shouldn't feel that way because you have God. Everyone has to die at some point. We're very good, very quick as Christians with our platitudes, and none of these comments are helpful. And yet they're so common in Christian circles. I think they come from a desire to find meaning and answers, maybe a desire to not live with suffering, rather than live with ambiguity and loss and suffering. We want to move on from that. Sometimes I think we're often drawn to a rigid theology, a black and white theology, because it helps us feel in control. And yet grief often exposes those rigid lines as inadequate. Not only do answers come from an unhelpful theology, but sometimes the questions also come from wrong beliefs that we've bought into. That somehow life is fair. I can control what happens to me. Often successful people feel like they can control what's happening to them. God is punishing me. If I tithe, then God will bless me. God will protect me from pain if I'm faithful to him. And loss exposes these false beliefs and often leaves us feeling adrift, feeling as if we've got nothing concrete to hang on to. One of the reasons grief can lead us floundering so much is that our nice, neat answers seem so inadequate and so unhelpful. I don't claim to be an expert on grief. People like Carolyn Liu and Roz and others who work in this field have far more profound insights on grief than I have. I've never experienced the loss of a child or a grandchild or even a parent, actually. My parents are still alive, although definitely declining. But what I do know is where the Bible intersects with grief, though. I want to leave you with just one thought, but it's a profound thought. God grieves. God grieves. Genesis 6:6, we read this, the Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. So the Lord was very sorry or grieved that he'd ever made them and put them on earth. It broke his heart. It broke his heart. It's an incredible thought. That the almighty, all-powerful God who created the universe is experiencing pain. It broke his heart. He saw life as was unfair. He saw premature death. He saw tragedy. And as he saw evil run rampant, it says it broke God's heart. God is perfect, and yet his heart was broken. It's a powerful bit of theology to get your heads around. This statement alone would blow most of our false theology out the door. That God's heart was broken. If we go to the New Testament, we have the famous example of Jesus weeping. The shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. We have Jesus weeping at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. Why is he crying? He knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, so why didn't he just breeze in and say, hey, sorry guys, I'm late. Got held up with some ministry stuff, but late after church and all that, don't worry, I can fix this. Just a bit of a hiccup, but she'll be right. It says he came and he wept. Why did he weep? I've read quite a lot about this verse, and commentators believe he's weeping over the curse of death that cuts life short. He's weeping over the fact that sickness causes so much pain. He's weeping over the pain that he sees in the community as they're grieving. He's weeping over the unfairness of life. And then, of course, we have Jesus' death, and Jesus grieved over the death of Jesus. God grieved over the death of Jesus. Now, I can't give you a reference for that. I can't tell you a verse where it says God grieved over Jesus' death, but it would be unimaginable that the Father God, if you understand anything of the Trinity, could have watched, this Trinity, this perfect love between the Holy Spirit, Jesus, and Father God. It's unimaginable that God could have watched Jesus suffer on the cross and not wept. The suffering of Jesus was unimaginable, and as anyone who has watched a child or a loved one suffer, it feels, well, I don't know if you can say this, but it almost feels as bad for the person who has to watch that suffering. When we think about Christmas and God entering our world, one of the names for Jesus is God with us, Emmanuel. It's not an abstract idea. When we say God with us, theologians talk about the incarnation. There are profound implications. Implications around God experiencing grief. God doesn't just know about our grief in an abstract way. God is with us in experiencing our pain and grief. This is where the virgin birth is not a take it or leave it piece of theology. That's why you find it in the early Christian creeds, and we sing one of those creeds, I believe in the virgin birth. Why is that so central? Well, this comes from Isaiah 7:14. All right, then the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the virgin will conceive a child, she'll give birth to a son, and we'll call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And Matthew picks up on this, and he says all this occurred, that's talking about the birth of Jesus, all this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. Look, the virgin will conceive a child, she'll give birth to a son, and they'll call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. When Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded and took Mary to be his wife, but he did not have sexual relationships with her till her son was born. And Joseph named him Jesus. So it's almost like Matthew is just clarifying, so there's no doubt about it, that Joseph did not have sex with Mary until after Jesus was born. He's reiterating the virgin birth. And the reason this is so central is that being fully human, Jesus fully identifies with humanity and the pain of humanity. We read in Isaiah 53, verses 3 and 4, he was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised, we did not care, yet it was our weakness he carried, it was our sorrows that weighed him down. We thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. A God who has experienced a broken heart, a God who has experienced the deepest of grief, a God who knows what it is to be weighed down by our sorrows, and yet a God who's all powerful and all knowing and all present. That's the kind of God I want to worship. It's the kind of God I want to follow. It's the kind of God who we can find comfort in. We started by reading the first 6 verses of Psalm 77. It's the writer expressing grief, anger, questioning, despair, sorrow, It's all there. But that's not the end of the psalm. Let's just close by reading the next verses. I recall all you've done, O Lord. I remember the wonderful deeds long ago. Constantly in my thoughts, I can't stop thinking about them. I talked about this last week, about the faithfulness of God, that we can look back on those key moments and see God's faithfulness. God, your ways are holy. Is there any God as mighty as you? You demonstrate your mighty power among the nations. You've redeemed your people by your strength. And we have a New Testament perspective on these Old Testament verses because we know how God has redeemed us. He's redeemed us through the cross. Redeemed means he's bought us back. He's paid the price for us. It says, you're the God of miracles and wonders. I'm actually not sure what the greater miracle is. Is the greater miracle that Jesus died or that Jesus rose again? That God could conquer death makes total sense. He created life. So, yes, he can conquer death. But that God would die and experience pain and suffering and sorrow, that makes no sense. That might be the greater miracle. As we grieve the losses of this year, as we refuse to push them down, as we refuse to minimize them or refuse to spiritualize them away, may we find comfort in a God who grieves, in a God who says, I am Emmanuel, God with us.